Welcome to the Integrate This at Tech podcast. I'm Jeremy Mikla, and I'm joined by co-host David Berner. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube instead of just listening to us on one of the podcast channels, which you might notice that instead of a 3-split screen here, we have a 4-way split, which is meaning we have 2 guests that are joining us here today. We have Donna Roper and we have Jen Hegna. Listeners might remember Jen was on our program, I think it was last summer. And I know we had some great conversations with her then, but we're excited to bring Donna on as well. And I think one of the things that we like to do with our guests is have them just kind of give a little bit of their background, rather than hearing it from David and I, then it sounds like a canned intro speech, people I think usually do better when they can kind of talk a little bit about where they are and how they got here. But I think what I'd like to say about both of you here before I turn it over and let you do that is David and I know both of you fairly well. Both of you are from Minnesota. David and I are from Minnesota. We've had the opportunity to speak with one another at different conferences and in different Zoom meetings and the like. And, I think David and I are coming from a place where I think I'd like to say at the outset that we really appreciate the work that both of you and the MNGAIA or AI4MN organization is doing on behalf of education in the state of Minnesota. So, I think both of us have definitely taken and borrowed liberally from some of the work that you guys have kind of been blazing a trail with. And so we really, really appreciate that. And so I'm going to kick it over to Donna first. Donna, why don't you give a little bit of background here, and then we'll give Jen the chance to do the same.
Excellent. Well, thanks for having me on. It's just an honor to watch even you guys grow in this whole podcast, as I've been following it for, I'd say now, a year. So yeah, a little bit about me. I think my day job really is about measuring success for systems. So I sit in the research, evaluation, and assessment, and now AI integration role with the St. Cloud area schools, which means, I really get to understand whether our students are learning and whether our systems are working and whether we're telling that story accurately and equitably to our families and staff and the school board. And so all of that also means that the things that are happening in our classrooms every single day aren't just large scale assessments, it's classroom assessment, and it's also AI, right? And so here's what makes the work really humbling and urgent for me is that in St. Cloud area schools, we look like the world, right? We have students from dozens of countries, dozens of backgrounds and languages, bringing in all kinds of lived experiences. And so when we design and we evaluate and create comprehensive, balanced assessment systems, we have to have broader definitions of success. And so I know this is kind of a long way to get to my point, but measurement actually has to be worthy of the full humanity of the kids that we serve, right? And this is actually what drew me to AI, right? Because that same question that we ask about every assessment, does it truly see this child, right, is also the exact question we need to be asking about every AI system and tool that is landing in the hands of, our skilled users to move and improve and accelerate learning. And so that's a little bit how I got into this space. And that's a little bit about my background. We started from a technology perspective and said, wait, this has to come from the learning perspective first, followed by the tech and supported through that lens. And so that's a little bit my background and how I come into this space. So we'll pass it to you, Jen.
Sure. Jen Hegna. I'm the Director of Information and Learning Technology for Byron Public Schools in Byron, Minnesota. And I have been doing this for a very long time. My first PD session was how to use email with teachers. And I remember that session, because it was the first time I ever designed any kind of PD. And I remember a teacher saying, well, when are we actually ever going to use this? So if you go back 30 years of, how that started, and today we're designing sessions around artificial intelligence. Just kind of shows the gamut of my work. I also am very passionate about human skills, and our district in the last 8 years have been working really hard on our profile of a graduate. And those are the human skills that, our folks need to bring to the table in this AI era. And some of the professional development that's happened within our district has really improved, the technology use in the classroom. So, and I'm a big believer that, learning design, instructional design really matters. And it's going to matter even more in the age of AI, which we already are here. So those are kind of my lenses. And I still, answer tech support calls and all of those other things, but I'm really passionate about professional development, learning, and how are we going to make sure we prepare kids for this era? Because it really is shaking up things on the outside.
So both of you have been in on the ground floor of the Minnesota Generative AI Alliance, morphing, I think, more into AI for Minnesota. Was there a moment, you think, that caused you and the other members of the group to say, hey, wait a minute, we need to, come together here in the state of Minnesota. Let's take AI, let's make sure we're applying a human lens to it and move forward in a similar direction. And what was that like?
I can start. I would say for me, just thinking about and the value of this group, like I don't remember any time in the last 30 years where K-12, higher ed, and the workforce were all kind of in the same spot. And to think about, how we have pockets of innovation in our classrooms, we have districts that are leading the pack, in different areas. But this is really, a unified effort to how do we make sure we prepare these K-12 students for the workforce that they are entering, to even those that are in the workforce, like how are they getting prepared? And I think that was my moment of realization. Of course, it started for me at the summit, and I'll let Donna talk more about that. But then having people collectively coming together from different areas of how to solve this problem was kind of the exciting work that really led me to AI4MN.
Yeah. And to just kind of piggyback on that, I don't think that we originally thought it was going to be about just, the human-centered skills. So 3 years ago when this kicked off, it was really about the what, the content, like what should kids need to know and be able to do? And the how is what MNGAIA was started off as, was to kind of kick down that how pathway of how are we going to use these tools. And it wasn't really until a year in where we sort of gathered team members and diverse perspectives and momentum, and I think spent some time studying and observing just how quickly AI was moving, right? Did we get to this point of the human-centered, human-led skills being really, really, more of a focus, at least from my perspective. So, I think we started out as the action-oriented group from the initial first summit of how are we going to move these tools? How are we going to make sure everybody has what they need? Knowing that districts are configured in very different ways and that their access to resources and information and just humans to help them move the work would be really uneven. And there was this gap maybe that we were seeing from the State Department into districts. And so we were trying to fill that hole initially. And it has evolved really nicely over time towards more of a focus. The Minnesota Generative AI Alliance for Education, obviously as agentic and agents popped up, we all were like, oh, Gen AI is not the only AI. Oh my goodness, we need to like be considering a broader range of AI tools and just its impact. And so the AI4MN was something that we were thinking about early on, but not thinking to change MNGAIA to AI4MN until we started realizing, well, agents and this is just going so fast, and we've got to be all inclusive. So, so I think really, and when I would say, Jen, your contributions and many other of the MNGAIA members who participated in some thought leadership work in August, I think helped us get more clarity around some of those human-centered priority skills that we're focusing on now.
Well, and I think too, like, as we think about whether it's professional development or any of those things, like keeping the people that we serve at the center of what we are trying to do is super important. The human-centered design approach starts with empathy, and that's, they're human skills that AI just cannot replace. And so I think it's super important that whatever we are designing, whether it's a thought leader summit, a professional development, any kind of policies, or, that we have to go back to who it is we're trying to serve. And we don't necessarily serve just one person. We have, a large range of people in Minnesota and a large range of students from different backgrounds and people with different resources. And so when we come together, how do we, level the playing fields for everybody to participate, and think of that while we design.
And Donna, I know you've had the opportunity to do a little bit of traveling around to some other states, and definitely been able to talk to leaders in other parts of the country, when it comes to AI in the AI and education space. And I'm kind of curious, from your perspective, how is Minnesota doing relative to those other states? Or do you think we're progressing, with the ideas, the policies, the guidance, and putting our energies in the right place as compared to other states? Or do you think we're falling behind about equal?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. And I've had a lot of time to think about that one, because I frequently wonder, like, are we behind? Where are we? When I stop and think about how important it is for us to get it right, or at least be, doing the next step in a very wise fashion, I don't necessarily feel behind. When I go into spaces that are nationally organized with other districts that are in curriculum and instruction, I don't feel behind. I feel like we actually have had a lot more conversation. We may not structurally on the books have policy or state regulation like other states, for example, North Carolina or even Utah. Mm-hmm. But I do think that we have a network. We've built a network through MNGAIA that is proving to be much more connected than what's happening in other states. So you will hear, when you come to the AI Summit, from Matt Winters, who is a state leader from Utah, talk about what's happening there. And he's created cross-state collaboration where we've been able to go and learn what they're actually doing in those states. And so from where we sit with MNGAIA, I feel very confident that we aren't behind. Let's just put it that way. Are any of us ahead? I don't know how you would quantify being ahead in this space. I think the best we can strive to do is be engaged, be thoughtfully engaged, and concerned, and working towards, making things work, sustainable, effective, impactful, those kinds of things.
Well, and you do have to concede that we Minnesotans tend to undersell ourselves a little bit here. So maybe there's a little bit of that going on too.
So yeah, I was going to ask, as things have progressed, and you brought this up, Donna, this is a really good point too, that it's not really about who's ahead. Everybody is trying to work on something to make things better or to improve in different areas and learn from each other, which I think is extremely important. Can we just take a step back and look at, so let's go back to like the beginning of MNGAIA. Who was in the room at the very beginning? Like who was that core group that first started out?
So that's a great question. At the very beginning, it started out with, I would say we had some policymaker people. We had higher ed. We had some business and industry folks. We had MASA. We had like the leadership organizations in K-12 in a space. And the idea, again, was to convene a group. We brought in some outside expertise from the OECD to get educated on some of the challenges. Really, the curriculum was the big topic of conversation, was how are we going to get to a place where we're defining educational competencies that are going to be meaningful in a world that's enhanced by AI, right? And so through this sort of 9 or 10 people representing those sectors, we created the summit. And we said at that summit, we were going to have action come from that summit. And we identified during that first summit 2 pathways. One was the what, which is, again, dealing with the curriculum and the standards. The second was the how, and that is how MNGAIA was sort of formed initially, was through that action step out of that initial one-day thought leader summit the first year. And then I think, Jen, you were at that very first one. So were you at the very first one?
I wasn't part of any planning of the first summit. I was actually I was just a participant, and it was fantastic. I didn't actually come on until probably year 2. And again, I was just more of a participant in some of the monthly MNGAIA meetings, and just found that I was becoming more and more connected to, what the possibilities and the opportunities that AI4MN or MNGAIA could, solve for the state. So, I would say I was a little later in the team, but I'm just thrilled to see what has been accomplished, and more importantly, what opportunities are to come. And I think I just want to echo some of the things that Donna said about other states. And I think right now there's an opportunity to go slow to go fast, to make sure we're really firm on some of the things that mean the most, that we feel mean the most, so that we can build the right things and work with partners that are building the right things for all of Minnesota. So that's whether you're K-12 or higher ed or in the workforce, I think that's the thing that I look back to and feel most connected.
So, and Jen, Byron has done some work in regards to AI as well as a standalone district. And so as you kind of look at your connection to MNGAIA, and then you have also the work that's being done internally at Byron, how does what happens at the MNGAIA level help in kind of some of the things that you might do at an individual district, so that it's not like you're just kind of on your own, but you're able to use that? How would you say those two connect?
I think a couple things. I think it was St. Cloud who first came out with their generative AI guidelines a few years back. And that was a signal, from definitely from our district, I'm not going to say it necessarily was MNGAIA, but that was definitely, a signal to get some of that work started. And by the way, that is excellent work to do with your districts. I know, you guys both are working with districts in your regions to do that. And because when we opened up and published our generative AI guidelines, which by the way was developed by a group of teachers, it just opened the door, and people weren't afraid to talk about it or weren't afraid to try things with students. So that was something, that was relatively connected to MNGAIA. And, all of the stories that come out from our monthly meetings and, other strategies that are happening throughout the state, kind of as that ideation is something that I really connect with as well. So there's lots of opportunities. And I think this network of people that we're starting to assemble, I think there's just opportunities, if I have an ELA teacher, or maybe a singleton teacher. I'm from a small district, we have singleton teachers that they're the only people. Well, this network could potentially connect them with other folks in the state that are teaching the same thing and those kinds of goals. But there's also sometimes, there was also some challenges that I was having in the district. And it's like, and what opportunity are there to, fix those challenges or find ways to overcome challenges? And knowing that, the way we've always done school isn't really serving, what these students are going to need. So, are there people out there that have either solved some of these problems, or are there, other examples of ideas where we can reach out to people that, might be able to help us solve those problems? And I think that to me was another area that I was super excited about, as kind of an inward, but then also outward, that inward outward experience that has happened within this group I think is to me invaluable.
One of the things, if you go to the AI4MN website, is and the claim that's made there is very Star Trekky in my mind when I read it out loud. But I want to say it anyway. It's boldly advancing Minnesota, grounded in deep humanity. And I think as part of that, and I've heard both of you speak to this a little bit as well, is that when you're bringing this group of people together, you're really trying to be representative of the entire state. And then I think that you're even trying to not just develop from, say, and if you're familiar with Minnesota geography, the metro Twin Cities area, neither of you really represent the metro area of Minnesota. Different parts of the state. St. Cloud's a good sized city, but Byron is rural outstate Minnesota. And really, I think what you're trying to do in the claim you make is design for the edges. So is that part of it, or what other types of edges does that look like in practice?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head there, right? We recognize that when we do design for the edges, and I think Jen likes to call it the fringes too, and that's a common word in this design world, you are much likely to hit the mark. And, the state of Minnesota deserves to be at the very least in the top 5 states nationally in education. Our education systems are strong, and we think when we design for the edges, it will be even stronger. At least that's my belief. So I don't know, Jen, what you would add to that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to even you think about like the Minnesota report card, and you this report card comes out every year, and it's not as prevalent as it used to be, but well-resourced districts, were able to do, some amazing things. And I'm not saying that, no offense to them. I mean, that's great. And some of these districts, they have people who have people, and they have just amazing ways to do great things. And as I think of, where I sit as, the small school voice, and we're still fairly large compared to, some of our more rural schools, that's not the same. And right now for our school districts, there's a lot of budget cuts that are happening. And so how do you progress the work? How do you keep going under all of these different constraints? And there's so many times, even working in the region here in Southeast Minnesota, where sometimes these things come through and they seem so unattainable for small districts that might not have a Donna Roper or a Jen Hegna or Jeremy or David in their districts. And so how do we progress everybody, the kids down the road? And I think that's where I feel that we have a real opportunity to collectively work together and move everyone forward, even though it might not be the perfect plan for, but at least everybody's moving forward. And how can we connect and collaborate? We say fiercely collaborate to really get that work done. And whatever that looks like, that's what we're still uncovering, and more stories come out. But that to me is when I think about, grounded in, deep humanity, we got to think about the kids we serve, the districts, their resources, so many other things that, and how do we bring everyone along, not just, those with, more people, more funds to do it, because it's not going to wait for us. AI, that's probably the biggest thing. AI is not waiting for us, and it's progressing, and these kids, their jobs are going to look different. And how do we make sure they're prepared for when they graduate? Prepared for how to live in the world today. It's not even really about graduation. How do we make sure they're prepared for living in the world that is today? So,
yeah, and I think that's definitely something David and I relate to, especially from the outstate perspective in the rural areas, like you talked about, that are, underfunded and don't have the capacity when it comes to AI that many of the larger districts around the state do. But one of the things that I want to touch on here, as it relates to the pillars that support that earlier statement here, and one of them is responsible AI leadership. And so my question is, what does that leadership need to look like? Does it start at the top, or is it something where, it can be found in a classroom teacher as well?
Yeah, I'll answer first and then pass it to you, Jen, because I think leadership is at every level, right? The ones that are leading the change on the front lines, students and teachers, they're leaders in a way, right? And I think responsible leadership with AI is engagement. Like, everyone needs to engage in the conversation, in the understanding, growing your AI literacy, fluency, understanding. Everyone needs to do that. That is responsible leadership, in my view. So whether you are the superintendent or a learner in 6th grade, I'm going to say we all have an obligation to build our collective AI literacy, fluency, understanding. And that term, fierce collaboration, which is one of MNGAIA's core values, is not by mistake. It is very intentional, because it is going to require us to collaborate across generation, across job, role, task. It's going to require just a mindset of, collaborating as we go through this intelligence revolution, because that's really what we're going to be going through in the next 5-10 years, right? So responsible AI leadership is get engaged. Don't ignore where we're at, as hard as it can be for some people, right? Even for me, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I can't even take it. Another new thing. This is mind-blowing, right? You just want everything to slow down and stop for a minute, and it isn't going to do that for us. But we don't have to own it. We don't have to know it alone. We have to reach out to our collaborators and say, what did you hear about that? Right? Like, we have ways to do this together if we lean into that idea. Mm-hmm. And, just recognize that leadership is all of us. Everybody.
I think, Jen, I'm going to direct you towards the next one here and give you a chance to respond to that one here. Professional empowerment. So what's the difference between AI training and true professional empowerment for educators?
Yeah, well, and I think first of all, AI training is what you're doing to your participants, right? So if you think about a training that I've been in, there's really not an opportunity to empower others to take the leadership, to take on, some of these things that are super important. And let's face it, leadership is probably one of the highest human skills that a person can attain, judgment and leadership. And whether you're a student, a staff member, like you can lead down, you can lead sideways, and you can lead up. So there's so many times where even listening to some of the teachers in classrooms and sharing their stories and ideas that they have value. So I think that when I think about professional empowerment, is it's that confidence component, right? So sometimes we need that beginner class just to get people in, and yes, sometimes it does require just a few little prompting techniques, but I think you want to think about how you design that to really get the understanding of the participant, some sense making of the participant, ideas that they have. And the biggest thing is what we've noticed with AI is there's opportunities where you can automate that part in your classroom so that you can get to the stuff that really matters, like the one-on-ones or the small group sessions with your kids, or visits into classrooms, or whatever that might be, the more human side of our roles. So I think that, and that takes some time. You're not going to go to a 1 hour PD session and be like, I am empowered necessarily, but it is how you position it. I just did a session within Byron just on our accommodations and modifications. And one of the feedback pieces was, I still feel valued as a teacher. Well, if we're doing PD that doesn't value the people that are going to, make all this work, then what is happening? So training, yes, there can be training, but we really need to think differently about how we deliver opportunities for conversations, value where people are. And I think that's what's empowering. It's not just, going to a training session on prompting.
I want to throw you a little softball, and we'll get into the summit in just a little bit here. So I don't want you to elaborate too much yet, but the AI Thought Leaders Summit that is coming up in St. Cloud in June, is it AI training or is it a professional empowerment conference?
Oh, that is, I'll try not to go too far into it, but in my mind, it's all about human or professional empowerment, and recognizing that the 250 plus people that will be in the room, we consider leaders. And wherever they are, in their journey of AI, we value them. And as they go back, to their homes or their organizations, that they feel empowered to take the next step, either within their classrooms, within a conversation with a classroom down the hall, whatever that might be. So thank you for that softball. I appreciate it.
So, and Jen, just a follow up too, and this is getting into the human-centered design piece of the pillars, but because of what you just mentioned there with empowering people that are going to be part of this event, but maybe in part of other events or collaboratives and things like that, what is it that you think that we should make sure is never outsourced by AI?
Well, definitely human judgment. That would probably be the biggest one, especially human judgment that impacts people. If it's one thing to decide, human judgment of whether I want a latte or a, black cup of coffee, right? Like that. But if there's something that actually is going to impact people, That's something that I would never want to outsource. And sometimes you have to get, caught up in, because even in my own conversations, it's like, what am I actually using AI as a thinking partner with versus like, how are they trying to, not they, but how is it shaping what I'm thinking? Because I always want to, I always want to take my own worth and my own thoughts first before, making any kind of judgment. Plus my own experiences, things that, have happened that were really great things, and even those bad experiences, so that would be, I would definitely say human judgment for me.
Yeah.
And
Well, I would just say, I would add judgment, and I would say relationships, right? How are we in relation with one another and how we actually know each other? I think we need to make sure that we are doing more of that, because as AI becomes more and more prevalent in our lives, it is going to matter how many relations we are keeping. That's going to be really important to just our humanity and our health, and our wellness. So I would like us to see relationships as something we would not outsource to AI,
Yeah, and I think, like Jeremy said, we'll get into the conference a little bit more, but I think that's one of the things that you'll definitely see at your conference too, is just there is collaboration opportunities, and people can talk with one another and kick around ideas, and that's really great. As you start to look at, so the fourth pillar here, the statewide coherence and impact, as you look at Minnesota broadly, and you see a bunch of different things going on in different areas, and interesting ideas that people are trying with AI. What do you think statewide coherence looks like, being that we have so many different things going on? And I don't think that, especially with the AI conversation, nothing really seems siloed. I think everybody's been very open with the things that they're trying and the things that they're doing. So as you start to look at coherence, does it mean that everybody's kind of doing a uniformed style of, be it AI guidance or training or things like that? Or how do you view coherence in that regard? And maybe even drawing from some of the other states that have more of a driven from the top down state level to the various districts. But speaking of Minnesota specifically, what does that look like, do you think, the coherence statewide?
Well, for me, it's thinking about like, what does it mean to prepare every learner in Minnesota to be fluent, aware? And, right now I see like pockets of great things happening throughout the state, whether it's K-12, higher ed, and industry. But there's pockets of things not happening. And I'm fearful more so for those folks that are not progressing or, are stuck, because I have grandchildren. They're not in the district that I work with. And like, how do we make sure that my grandkids are prepared, or, my friends' kids, or whomever that is? And so that to me is where the coherence comes, is, are there things that, could position us, signals that could better position us? I know like MSBA has recently shared their model policy, which is a great signal. The Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor has AI literacy, which is another good signal, but it's still, there still are fringes of folks that need that support, might not be having those conversations. And I think, however that can happen, to make sure every, and how can not just learn how to use AI, but lead with AI. I don't know what the workforce is going to look like. I honestly don't. And I can't even predict. I used to be able to predict things a long time ago. Now I can't. So like, if we think about jobs, like what are the jobs of the future to be? Are they more entrepreneurial? Like what are the opportunities for a kid in rural Minnesota to, come up with a new opportunity to, be able to make some money, raise a family, and so that's kind of my thinking is like, how do we make sure everybody's prepared, even those that might not be well resourced to be able to do that?
Yeah, and Donna, I was going to ask you too, along the same lines here with the statewide guidance. Do you think that it's is there a benefit to having a state-driven guidance, or is there, like, for me, I do still really like the idea of having, it seems like with the different areas doing stuff with AI, or maybe even it's a single district, it seems like there's a lot of innovation that happens because of that. And there are things that someone might try that the rest of us can pick up on and benefit from. Do you think that that can still stay that way if we have a top-down approach? Let's say the Minnesota Department of Education came up tomorrow and said, everybody's got to have this same policy and things like that. Do you think that, what's your opinion there as far as, can you do both? Or
Yeah. Well, I think if you study how systems change, right? There are situations where something coming from the top down makes sense and would not hurt innovation per se, but without it would hurt innovation, right? So like when you think about safety, right? When you think about things that have less added value at a local level that could be managed centrally and bring great value, those kinds of things bring coherence without stopping innovation, in my mind. It's tricky though, right? Because it's not, oftentimes when we want to lead from the top down, it's so all or nothing. It's everything or nothing, where it really needs to be just some things, right? And not everything. And so I'm trying to think of an example I could give for that. That would make sense.
Kind of like the power standards.
Right.
There's 150 billion standards.
So the state's responsibility to help us be really clear, for example, on the educational competencies, like those are things that I think, can help us without stopping innovation. But on answering this question about statewide coherence and what I actually think will happen from the summit, or what I hope happens, is that people are going to come to the summit to have an experience of this inward-outward activity, so to speak. This is going to be common language. It's going to be a common experience. We have representatives from all over the state, every corner of the state just about represented in this conference. And in my systems change training, at some point, I learned a quote that just sticks with me, and I'm going to read it so I say it exactly the way it is, because you'll appreciate this, I think. And what it is we kind of have a bifurcated reality right now, right? We have people saying, no AI, it's dangerous, it's bad, no technology in the classroom, right? And we have people saying, but we need to use these tools, right? And so I think if we can understand that there are these islands of coherence that are going to come from the summit, and through the tiny crack of this way or that way is going to be an opportunity for us to build coherence across the state. And so let me just find this quote briefly, if I can here.
While you're finding that quote, I think the signals it definitely helps, but I think there needs to be flexibility in how, districts are able to adopt. Yeah. Whether it be, the policy, which is a model policy, right? It's not in law or anything like that. But it's interesting how many districts have actually adopted that policy. And so anytime, that at the state level, just kind of points to the direction, I don't think that's a bad thing. Give people the autonomy to decide how they, will get to the how to get to that direction. But I do believe, that would help with some of that coherence. But I'm not all about, handing over all of these policies without any mandates or dollars to help with them and all that kind of stuff. But I do think it at least shows that Minnesota is pointing in the same direction.
In Minnesota, all of our school districts are numbered, right? And all of them start with ISD. And of those three letters, it tends to be the I that's most important in the state, and that's the independent part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So here's the quote. Small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. So we have pockets of coherence that are going to come from having common experiences that are going to be, around the state in all corners, right? That's my hope, is that that's where the coherence is going to really come from. But I will say the policies are coming too. The top-down stuff is going to come and need to be looked at and thought
Challenged.
through. Well, thought through. And this is the thing, is that it's easy to not want to do that. It's easy to just say, well, let's just adopt the whole thing and then we're covered, kind of, right? And that's unfortunately, that's going to happen. But hopefully we will have enough pockets of people that are willing to sit thoughtfully with each of these. But again, safety, everyone's going to agree on the safety things. That's going to be easy, right? There are going to be pieces that everyone's going to be able to shake their head and say, yep, absolutely, that makes sense.
Well, I would say, the safety things are going to be easy to say, but to articulate and do, that's where that can be challenging for, again, districts with not a lot of resources. And so I would say it's easier to define, but might be harder to implement depending on what district you are.
Well, I guess I would agree with that. And hopefully the empowerment and the agency that we're building through our summit and through monthly conversations helps us with that.
Yeah, and it's those monthly conversations I want to touch on here for just a moment, but we'll make it brief here, because AI4MN is more than just a conference that's happening, at one point in a year. It's monthly meetings that take place, and from my vantage point, that has attended many of those meetings, and David and I had actually the opportunity to share in one part of the meeting a couple of months ago. They operate differently than other network meetings that I've belonged to. How would you describe kind of their purpose, their flow, or what you choose to focus on in those different meetings?
Well, we always start with, a voice from Minnesota. So a practitioner, doing some amazing things. Usually it's to show what learning looks like in the age of AI. And we've had folks from, higher ed share. And I think that is always, it's grounded in a story somewhere in Minnesota, either in a classroom, in a region. I know you guys have done some things for us. And it's, really the storytelling of how this is starting to shape classrooms and organizations in Minnesota. And then we usually get into, some conversations, somewhat facilitated, opening, the door of that empowerment and sense making. And then there's usually some kind of a sprint where we're designing something, lots of times using AI, most of the time using AI, modeling AI that isn't working for us. And I think that's the kind of the arc is, we start with a practitioner first, have some conversations, breakout sessions, and then, in the end, design something that either can be utilized for Minnesota or for the South. And that's pretty much kind of the same concept a little bit for the 2-day summit. Did I miss anything?
No, I can actually see some of that here, but you've also talked about how one of the neat things about this organization is the bringing together of K-12, higher ed, and workplace industry. So if you were to say, if someone were to ask, what does higher ed and industry not understand about AI when it comes to the K-12 space? What would you try to tell them?
I don't know if they know what's actually happening. There's been some pretty exciting stories of opportunities that have happened. And sometimes I think K-12 gets this rap of like, oh, you can't go above the bar. You can't, like, here's your ceiling, and you just see all these pockets of things, going way beyond what anybody even thought about. And so I would say that would be one thing is not, understanding what's happening in K-12. I don't know. Do you have anything to share?
Yeah, well, I would say, and I've said this, that K-12 is sort of the epicenter of everything, because what happens right now in K-12 is going to impact higher ed and workforce in the next 5 years significantly, right? And so, there is a common interest, if you're in higher ed or you're in workforce, to be in collaboration with K-12 and concerned with how it's going to roll out, because it's going to have a direct impact. And, it isn't, the current workforce jobs are not going away quite like people say. I think there's tasks that are definitely, going away, but still have quite a bit of human oversight. And I really believe our students in the K-12 space, I mean, they are the ones that are going to really make a big difference in how our society evolves through this intelligence revolution. That's how I think about it. And I just think that learning and teaching is really what we do in K-12. In higher ed, we research and we teach, and yes, we do learning and teaching, but workforce, we do, we don't, that's not our core business, learning and teaching, right? But yet that's what we're going to need to do to reskill and upskill. So to me, I think the K-12 level it's the epicenter for me with this AI movement. And I think it needs to be for our kids and for our future.
And I think, like some of the application of AI, right? So some of the things that can happen when you get past, some of the cheating conversations and you get into a place where the teacher has their standards, they're checking to make sure students are thinking, but the student has this tool that could have more of an impact, not just on themselves, but on their communities. And I think there's just I don't know if that would be my only question. I don't know if higher ed or workforce realize just how bright our stars are in our K-12 classrooms and our teachers to be able to do some amazing things. And by the way, they're going to need a lot of practice at that stuff. Like that's also practicing a lot of human skills that are just so critical. But that would be my wonder is do they know what is actually attainable? Because for so long, it's been about test scores and GPAs and all that other stuff, which, by the way, didn't serve for a lot of our brilliant students. I think there's just a new opportunity of what's attainable when we get it right.
So let's take a little bit here to kind of preview the upcoming summit. So this is the third annual AI Thought Leaders Summit. And if you're listening and you heard MNGAIA and AI for Minnesota, you're kind of you've made the switch over to AI for Minnesota, right? Just so that we're clear on that. But previously MNGAIA. It's scheduled for June 15th through the 16th. It's at Apollo High School in St. Cloud. So the first question about this is, who should come to the summit and why?
Well, I would say anyone that represents K-12, higher ed, and workforce and has an interest in preparing their learners for what's next, I think would be my thought for sure.
And if you're a policymaker, this is the place for you to be. There is no better learning for a policymaker than this summit, in my view. To add on to those.
Yeah, and you had mentioned this to us as well, but some of the you'll have folks from different states, but also from bigger organizations like COSIN, and Keith Kruger will be in attendance as well. And it's a chance to connect all those voices, which is really great. What do you hope attendees leave with after that conference?
I hope people come and they're empowered and they have actionable ideas that they can implement back in their organizations, whether it's a classroom, a school, a district, higher ed, workforce agencies. That's what I would hope, is because it's not just a thought leader. We're not just coming to think, but also think about what we can do to improve the experience back for the people we serve back home.
That's great. I hope they leave with a lot of agency and energy and hope, and make the changes. Know that the changes we need, they are the ones that can help us make them, right? Everyone needs to feel that they have a voice and an ability to move our education system to the very best that it can be. And so my hope is they leave with a really strong sense of agency and hope. And yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to add is, day 2 is building outward. And that's kind of where I get super excited about that coherence piece, is like, here we all are, 250 plus of us representing different organizations. And what are some common things as we think about Minnesota and think about our own story that, could help the whole state. And so that's something I'm super excited about, and getting those voices to be part of that design.
So, and one of the things too is the core of the conference is Minnesota folks, right? And those that are coming to the conference from Minnesota to offer insights and share with others. What about you have 2 featured speakers at the event, your spotlight speakers, Chris Agnew, who's done some things with the Stanford research that came out, and then Matthew Winters, who, Donna, you had mentioned, and works with the Utah State and some of the things that they're doing there. What was the choice? Why were those 2 chosen, or what were you hoping with that?
Well, I think, our conference is leading learning in the age of AI. And Stanford has recently published a lot of research of what it is, what does it mean to learn in the age of AI. And I think sharing that strategy or sharing those stories and that feedback is super important, so that as we go back and design, instructionally design or design whatever it is, that we really have a good understanding of what does it mean to learn. There's been a lot of things shifting, back in the day, if I had a Power or a Google slideshow, that was an artifact of learning. And I think things are slowly starting to shift, and we have to think about, what is the current research? What is that base, and what does it look like? And as we start implementing tools and other things, like, what are the things we need to make sure we want to adhere to or think about? And yes, you could probably ChatGPT some of this, but to hear what the research actually says from researchers in the field, I think is really important. And then Matt is kind of, the whole idea of a statewide cohesive kind of model. And to hear what that story looks like. They actually started with human skills. They had a portrait of graduate, like however many years ago. And now they have the AI literate graduate, they have AI literate teachers, they have AI literate workforce, and maybe some other organizations. But it kind of stemmed from, the building of those human skills, which are super important, and to just hear the story. Not that we have to, say that we want, Minnesota to copy exactly what Utah did, but it is a story of statewide coherence that is important to hear for the participants.
Yeah, and I think this conference, as I look out the high level agenda for the day, or each day separately, right? But it follows a different rhythm than what I think you normally expect in a at least in an educational conference, right? That there's time built in to help frame what that day will look like, to help explore through different breakout sessions where you said you had over 70 different proposed sessions, which is really, really awesome for a 2-day conference. Then a chance to converge, and also then to end the day. And I like the term, I know Jen used it, a sprint, like a design sprint at the end. So how does this framework for the summit help produce more than just a conference focused on new tools to explore, or what's a new idea, but rather, maybe ways to fully comprehend and apply the human-centered nature of AI?
I'm going to do a short answer and then let you talk about this, Jen, because you've been working so much on making sure we put together a really good experience for folks. But so this was the design of our first summit. It was around action. And in order for a convening of this sort to spur activity in our state, I don't think there's any other or as likely to succeed scenario than what I would say Jen and the team that's building out the program have put together. So, we need action, and we need learning. We need action inspired by the learning. And so to me, this is, going to be a beautiful event that helps us realize some great activity afterwards.
Yeah, I would say, that if we go back to human-centered design, one of the strategies is something called design thinking. And design thinking, starts with empathy. So instead of, just being, in a place where it's like, oh, we just need this, like, it's really starting with empathy. And so while we're not doing a true design thinking model, just because of the sheer not enough time to do it, we are taking an approach to make sure that, empathy is definitely part of the experience, that we clearly define what we need. And I think that too is, sometimes it's like, we need every student to be AI literate. Well, who's responsible for that? And so really, really works through some things that, we're clear. And then the fun part, ideating and prototyping, my goodness, like AI is awesome for some of those kinds of things. And, and then coming up with some of the testing and sharing these different ideas with each other to get feedback. You can even do that with AI too, if you really wanted to. But I think that's what I'm excited about with this approach, is it's taking the human-centered design approach, not necessarily perfectly matched, but darn near a focus to it, and bringing that through line on both days. And actually, what you start with on day one can be a great experience for the final design on day two. Or if you're just coming for day two, you'll still get that through line. So I think that was the thing that our design group has been working on, is like, how can we make it cohesive and so that, and very active and interactive. Because too often there's a lot of times where I've been to a conference and you just sit and get and listen, and you might have a couple of table talks, which are great. But that's where this is just going to be a little different. We really want those ideas and opportunities that we should be thinking about to come out in the conference or in this.
Well, Donna, Jen, it's been great having you talk to us about all these different concepts and about the work that AI4MN is doing. And could you talk just briefly about where folks can get the information for the event and registration, the session breakdown, all that type of thing?
Sure. I would encourage anyone in Minnesota or even the tri-state area to check out AI4MN.org, and that's AI, the number 4, MN.org. And there you can see, who all of our sessions that have been published, the overview. You can still register, so please join us. And I'm excited for this opportunity and look forward to June 15th.
All right. Thanks again for joining us. It's been great to have you on. And, I know for my part, I'm super looking forward to the conference also. I know David and I will both be there and we'll both be presenting.
Awesome. Thank
Can't
you.
wait.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.